Good morning and welcome to day 3. Happy Friday, everybody. Just trying to keep you on your toes, make sure everyone's awake this morning. Happy Thursday, day 3, last day of our symposium. Thank you for being with us, and welcome again to everybody tuning in online. Thank you for joining. We have a full agenda today, but TBD on how these breakout sessions go. And I've heard from one of our session leaders in the afternoon that if we are quick and short, that wouldn't be a bad thing. So TBD on closing time. But this morning we're going to start off. I have 2 notes real quick before we start off on the first session. First of all, during the discussions, when we have folks who want to speak or ask a question, we have moved the microphone to the front here, stage left. And that's just for a little more visibility for folks online and also for everyone in the room to see each other. So you'll be a little bit more lit up. So, but please do continue to speak. We've had great engagement over the first 2 days, so we still encourage that. And second, for this group, for lunch today, we will be not in this Telluride, but once again, we will be over in Monarch. So follow the leader out and you'll find the buffet at the same place what we had the buffet for technical track yesterday. All right, with that said, let's start with our first session of the day. This is a spotlight session on overcoming Open RAN deployment hurdles. And we will hear from AJ Rajkumar from AT&T Network. He's the CTO and ORAN Operator Advisory Team Chair. So AJ, please welcome him to the stage.
Good morning. Just a small correction. I'm not the CTO. I am part of the Chief Technology Office or organization. Next slide. Jeremy, could you tell me, is this the... Okay. So I think you've been hearing a lot about Open RAN, and I just wanted to dispel or probably just talk about Open RAN. To me is a concept. It is not really how you deploy networks. So I'd probably take you to the journey of from the concept to practice of Open RAN. So let's talk about, and I think some of it would be probably very well known to everyone, but I just wanted to remind as to what exactly we're talking about. This is what has been defined as the Open RAN architecture, and you'd see a lot of open interfaces, but I'd like to simplify it from a deployment standpoint and try to tell you as to how exactly people think about when they start deploying it. So first of all, obviously, if you have to deploy it, you have to start thinking about bits and bytes. And because if you have to define bits and bytes, that is where specifications come in, and that is where Open RAN Alliance and the ORAN comes in. So Open RAN is a concept, ORAN is its manifestation as we deploy it. Now, everyone talks about vendor agnostic interfaces, which is an important piece. I'd not disagree with that. But then when I look at, I see 3 distinct buckets that I can define the entire end-to-end RAN. The entire industry's focus has primarily been on open front haul. It was a good low-hanging fruit, a very important pain point for operators, and that is why focusing on it probably was a very good thing. Except for that we have lingered on it quite a bit. All the CU/DU interoperability tests that go on probably have been done now. So I think we could move on to what other potential advantages there are to deploying an Open RAN network through ORAN. So as I was saying, I'll basically define it into 3 buckets. One is the deployment scenarios, which can be achieved through the disaggregated network. What do I mean by that? I basically would say that there are scenarios where you would want to have a distributed unit, and there are scenarios with a CU much more centrally located, whereas there are other scenarios where they could be combined together. And I think that should not be ignored. The second is the entire management and orchestration framework, and I'd club the RAN intelligence, both from non-real-time RIC as well as near real-time RIC, into that entire bucket of intelligence. Because what does it provide us? It provides us the optimization and automation that we are looking for. But it has essential elements, and that is where it ties itself with these open interfaces. And I'd call the two open interfaces most important, and that is the O1 and the O2. O1 basically gets you vendor agnostic information from the network functions, whereas O2 gets it from the cloud infrastructure. Now, the third piece, the third bucket that I call is the O-Cloud. O-Cloud is in the parlance of O-RAN, but in general terms, you would say we have discussed virtualization in this industry for a very long time. I myself have discussed it probably for over 10 years. We have been able to achieve virtualization in the core, both to some extent for the NSA, EPC, similarly for SA, for 5G core. But I would say that in the RAN, one of the things that is different from the core is data center centric, whereas RAN is far more distributed. Now, if you want to have a multi-cluster deployment, because obviously the compute resources, needs for compute resources could be very different depending on if you're doing FR1 or FR2. It could be very different what kind of MIMO configurations you're using. And so you would say that, yes, there could be multiple servers in a cluster, and then it could be geographically distributed. Now, what that implies is that, yes, you do need to have some kind of a management interface so that this dispersed resource, compute resources, and I'll just use compute resources, but obviously you can talk about storage and other attributes of a cloud, that needs to be managed centrally, and I'll cover that as well. So I think multiple paths to implementing O-RAN. You can obviously deploy an end-to-end, and we at AT&T really believe that, yes, an end-to-end open RAN deployment in terms of all the components is essential to get all the advantages that it provides. But then you can have implementations for specific components, and you could choose a bucket. There are very clear dependencies that you'd have to cater to so that you can do proper deployment. But otherwise, you could look at open interfaces. Open front hall comes to mind right away. Yes, you could do an ORU, ODU using an open front hall, and that would be easy initial implementation, but then you'd have to go a little further. You could do an incremental implementation, whereas you first do an open front hall, but then after that, you'd have to probably move to O1 and O2 to really achieve that advantage that I was earlier addressing. And I think to a real deployment, I would say, I think as an industry, we are still lacking significantly in terms of there being gaps. Gaps both in terms of standardization for O1 and O2, and gaps in terms of implementations. Just as an example, I would say that if we talk about O1, currently in O-RAN itself, there are about 300, and I'll just give an example, a simple example of PM counters. You can take it to FM, you can take it to the entire gamut of FCAPs. But if you do PM, FM, and CM, and just look at PM, there are about 350 counters that are defined. The question that comes to mind is, how many products are there that really have implemented all those in a vendor agnostic fashion, such that true interoperability can be done? And I'll give you a very important reason why that needs to be done. Because ultimately, the goal of this entire effort would be that, yes, you can do intelligence and automation. Where does that come from? Our general intuitive perception is that, yes, that would come through our apps. some RIC frameworks, whether it is near real-time, and that's a huge debate. I'd not go into it, near real-time or non-real-time RIC. How does that get achieved? If an RApp cannot get the telemetry data in a vendor-agnostic fashion, then that piece of intelligence and optimization and automation cannot be done. Simple. And that is why these interfaces become extremely important, both from the standpoint of doing standardization work. And what does standardization mean? Yes, you'll have to define information models. You'll have to define data models for those counters. And then you could do development. Because if you look at from a vendor standpoint, you would say that, yes, if there are no, even as simple as just naming conventions need to be specified very clearly. So I've already covered disaggregation and open interfaces. Just time check, I think I have about 8 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes. No. Okay. Huh? No, we started it. Oh, don't worry. Disaggregation, I've covered that. Cloud, I've covered that. And automation optimization, I've covered that. So let's talk about deployment considerations for RAN and NFs. So I did touch upon levels of disaggregation because the deployment scenarios need to be considered. Transport latency, and that does play into, for each operator, it would be different requirement in terms of what kind of latencies they have in the network for the transport and what kind they can cater, which would play into as to how much centralized or distributed their COTU deployments can be. And then I think virtualization, when we talk about, we cannot just have a software module that was probably developed for a PNF be just virtualized as put on cloud resources. Obviously, it will have to be put on. It'll have to be, the stack would have to be developed as a cloud native NF implementation. Resiliency does come into mind because as you go more centralized, but one could say that yes, the blast radius could increase. And so yes, resiliency is an important thing. Data management, I've covered through O1. And yes, our apps need to be, an ecosystem of our apps need to be developed. For that, information is extremely important. I'll go to the SMO deployment considerations for SMO framework, and I'm just going through the buckets that I had listed initially to really give you an idea of what considerations you would have to make. So minimal set of SMO services, and now I would think that everyone understands what SMO is by now. So SMO services, I think telemetry does provide you with what I would consider as observability of a network. In real time, you'd be able to look at the PM counters and say as to what exactly the network, how well the network is performing. So there are observability assurance services, and I would go through. If you look at down below, you would say topology and inventory is an important service, because that is how you'd be able to really onboard services on your onboard network functions on your network. I've covered service orchestration and service assurance, but then two other essential services. I call it DME and SME. And that is what enables our apps to really discover what data elements are available and still make it vendor agnostic. Because unless you have a very good way of defining those data types that would be available, our app vendors cannot really develop their apps and hope that they can do it on every network. And if we do not, we basically are going back to the SON days. And we have had those same battles during the SON days for the past 10 years between centralized SON and distributed SON. And that is exactly parallel to what we talk about today for near real-time RIC and non-real-time RIC. But there, the problem was that it was so very specific to a vendor's network function. And that is what we want to get away from. So look at the critical aspects of what really needs to be done and think about it from that perspective as we deploy these networks. One of the things which I think I just want to touch upon, and I'll not go much further, when we talk about our apps, I think one of the considerations comes up as to what the governance model of that R app is. And just as an analogy, I would say that if you think about the App Store or the Google Play Store, that is the concept that you would eventually have to think about as to how an app gets onboarded on a network. How does it get data and how does it get trained? Obviously, going forward, we would think more and more that these R apps use ML techniques. And so we would have to think about those. Onboarding is a huge effort within ORAN at this point, and I think we are trying to cover that because that becomes an essential service as well. It is not just a mere saying that yes, a software package, when it comes, that it automatically gets onboarded on, or where does it get deployed. Conflict resolution, I think some people have mentioned that in this conference over the last 2 days, but I think yes, conflict resolution is an important aspect as well, because if you think about that, hundreds of applications could be really changing a live network and not conflict or not have a negative impact on the network, I think that we'd be sorely mistaken. Just a couple of points, a couple of slides. Deployment considerations for virtualization. I think obviously this discussion about containers versus VM has gone, and I think that people can make this. But the two essential services for O2 is the IMS and the DMS, which is infrastructure management and the deployment management. One is to manage the resources itself and then deploy network functions on those resources. Those are essential services. Obviously, one of the things that does play into this is the topology and inventory. And the final thing, I think the pet point about testing and integration, I think one of the things that would come into play is that as this multi-vendor environment plays out, what exactly happens to versioning control across multiple vendors? I think that becomes an extremely essential and important consideration. But there are roles of testing. I've discussed with some of you guys as to how we need to really update performance testing and so on. TIFG is the main source that we have used for some of this testing. And the other thing which I would say is that when we talk about IoT profiles, we think that is the nirvana. That is the end state. But if you look at IoT profiles today, the way they're defined, it really does look at a minimal subset of configuration parameters, and it really doesn't go to. So then, yes, you could say that you have proven a point about doing IoT, but then you have to go next. And as it goes into an operator network, you realize that, yes, you have to do much more. With that, I'm done. Yes, any curveballs?
Okay, thank you so much for this excellent presentation, as I think it addresses key problems that we are facing in the ORAN architecture. My name is Alphonse, I'm with High Street Technologies. And actually, there is an activity within Workgroup 9 together now with Workgroup 1, which precisely addresses the problem that we do not have a consistent data model on the SMOS communication, respectively on the R1 interface. And before starting excessive testing in OTICs, I think we actually have to define those interfaces in order to create an open ecosystem. Otherwise, we will end up with, with Android or iOS, that we have just two let us say, platforms, or stores, and something like a duopoly or so. And that's something I think in the interest of operators, but also our app developers, that's something that we should avoid.
Is there a question, or it's a statement?
It's more a statement. I just wanted to say that there are activities in the ORAN Alliance which precisely address the open issues that you addressed.
Sure. Thank you. Any others? No? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. And next up, we're going to go right into the discussion. The first one is a interactive workshop main session discussion among all attendees. This will be led by David DeBrecht from Cable Labs, and Mark Paletti is not able to be with us today, so replacing Mark is Lorison Harden from NTA ITS. And with that, let's get started.
I'm not a replacement for Mark, I'm just a stand-in. All right, thank you very much. So I think now that we've been through a full day of this, everybody kind of knows the drill. Please feel free to come up to the microphone and keep your comments and questions short. We'll chat about them, and our job up here mostly is to facilitate and take notes to make sure we have captured everything that was discussed. Whether they are questions posed to other folks in the audience or for the breakouts that are going to follow this. And then we can go from there. If we have any specific comments between Larston and myself, I'm sure we will add to it, but the whole point is to get the conversation going before the breakout sessions. Just one thing to make note, this is all about confounding issues that impact testing. This has been talked about a number of times already in the last couple of days. The main session yesterday, there were a lot of comments around that as well. I went and I actually looked at John Baker's Open RAN ecosystem chart. If you've seen that, and he posted sometimes, the latest numbers as of August were 136 entities from 21 countries. And when you think about that, it's kind of daunting. How do you wrap your hands around 136 entities to come together to a common understanding and a common way of doing things to make it all work? I will say that I do believe that it's possible. I think we can get there, but it's not going to be necessarily easy to do. There are a number of cases in the industry where it does work, Wi-Fi being one. There is a Wi-Fi certification that you go to a certified accept a test lab and you get your Wi-Fi certification. So there are cases where it can work. We just have to figure out how to make that happen for Open RAN. So I'll just open with that, and then from there, please feel free to come on up and propose any kind of questions or thought-provoking comments that we can move forward on for the discussion.
I'll add some just for that process that, yeah, there's a wide berth. You heard David say it, and also heard Ajay earlier say how deep the standards can be. And I think the concept is, let's make sure we're doing this incrementally. Let's not try to, go ahead and boil the ocean, as they say, and that's, I think, some of the discussions have been happening, whether it be in the MVP work at ADIS, whether it be at TIP, is this concept of blueprints or concept of use cases of what are we trying to do first versus trying to do everything at once. So that's sort of an interesting thought about, okay, there's confounding issues. There's things that are getting in our way. The question I would throw to people is, are we letting them pile up instead of just, eating the elephant one bite at a time? So that's an interesting way of thinking about this thing that we're trying to do, which is really trying to transform an industry. And that didn't happen overnight, but where are the big chunks?
Yeah, and when Mark and I were prepping for this, and apologies that he couldn't make it today, but when Mark and I were prepping for this, we made a list of maybe some things to get people starting to think about. So many of you have worked with OTICs, and that's where the testing gets done today for Open RAN. Cable Labs is an OTIC, so I have my own experiences from the other side on how it works to actually do the testing and have folks that are trying to get those certifications done for the vendors. But I would ask everyone to think about what experiences have you had with OTICs so far in terms of Open RAN? If you're a vendor, if you're an operator, if you're an OTIC yourself, what experiences have you had and what has worked and what has not worked? Kind of where are we at? Start with where are we at today? And then we can kind of move forward on, as Larson just said, how do we move forward with finding solutions to the individual problems so that we're not trying to boil the entire ocean. So I'll just leave that as one first probing question to see if anybody has any thoughts or comments on where we're at today and what experiences you've had.
Be aware that I'll call on people if you don't come up. So it's, David's a lot nicer than I am. So
leave it to me to mess it up. Okay. Morning. Ian Wong from VIAVI, also ORAN TIFG co-chair. Just want to kick things off. It's early in the morning. People have just had their coffee. So there's almost 20 OTICs around the world today. I think one of the key issues that we in the ORAN Alliance are trying to resolve is really, frankly, quality. Yeah, we don't know, frankly, because it's called open loop process, at least within the ORAN Alliance. So you can just look at the list. There are probably some OTICs that are much more interested in issuing certificates and badges for vendors, others that are really not. So one of the things we're thinking about is how do we accredit OTICs? Like how do we make sure that a vendor that is looking for that certificate and badge knows where to go? So we're making steps towards that, at least from a ORAN Alliance, public-facing website standpoint, making it clear, what OTIC services are available, but kind of going further and saying, is there any accreditation that's needed for these OTICs, right? We've probably heard of ISO 17025, which are used by other organizations. We heard an example of Wi-Fi Alliance, which is a much more centralized certification body. So those are things that are, I think, talking about confounding is, there's actually not a small number. It's close to 20. But for vendors, it's like, where do I go? So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was looking at that just yesterday, even just 2, 3, 4 years ago, when this was all ramping up, there were, I think, 5 or 6 OTICs when Cable Labs became an OTIC, just based on our history of doing similar things for other parts of the industry. And that was relatively manageable because you could talk to the other 7, 6, 5 labs, whatever they are, and make some plans and things. And now that there are 19 as of yesterday, and I know that there's at least 2 or 3 more that are being looked at to get certification, pretty soon we're going to have quite a few. And I mentioned this in another session yesterday. We need to figure out exactly how that works. Because all of them doing everything probably isn't going to work. Number one, there's not enough business for them to do that. There's not enough business out there for every one of those labs to do everything and try to make a business of doing that, because keeping these labs up and running is quite expensive. The test equipment, the environments, the power and air, everything else is just very, very expensive. So it's one thing we need to work on to figure out how to do that. And Ian's got a good point. I think trying to figure out what test labs do what things might be a good place to start for that.
Sridhar Rajgopal from Avenir. So we have participated in many OTICs events in the past, including, I think we are there at Cable Labs as well. So our experience with OTICs has been that I think it's a great place to try out multi-vendor interoperability from a testing perspective. But I think the issue that we have seen is, okay, you do some testing at the OTIC, you do some plug fest, you show some, there's a PR that comes out, but what next after that? I think I have not seen any operator RFP, RFI, or something that says, hey, I want to see this, I want to see your participation in some OTICs and showing some results. I mean, everybody, every operator RFI or RFP that I see, I mean, they want us to come to their labs and do the testing. So it just becomes like I have to do an extra effort. And you do it once. I mean, again, OTICs, I mean, I think we have like 3 events a year or 4 events a year. You do it once, and then, okay, then is there a value for me to go again after 3 months or 6 months and others in the same location or a different location and do the same tests again, or just a lot of overhead for a company, especially a small company, to do that same testing multiple times. So I think that's probably another thing we should discuss as part of how, because again, software evolves, hardware evolves, the people you're trying to do some interoperability with evolves. So, but how do you keep this going in terms of as a process and as a part of validation? I think that part is not clear. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I have a few comments on that since I'm up here and have the microphone. As an OTIC and as an owner of a test lab in other parts of the industry that do this, a couple of things come to mind. The first is the OTICs are serving 2 different functions. One is certification of existing products and going through the lab, and yeah, you got your badge and everybody's happy. The other one is the plug fest, like was just mentioned. We are doing both. Almost all other OTICs are doing both. I kind of see those as 2 very, very separate things. So if you put a plug fest together, you're doing it to look at something a little more forward-looking, a little more research, a little more, hey, how does this work? Can this work? Are we ready yet for driving something else because this is working? So it's more of a let's try it and see how this works and how can we make it better. So that's more of the forward push. The other half is actually doing the testing and doing the badging and the certifications and things like that. I will say again, just based on our experience working in other parts of the industry, doing this work, it can work. It absolutely can. But it needs to be a little more organized than it is today. This is my opinion. Because if you, for example, right now, and it all starts with the operators. Right now, if you go and you want to put a Wi-Fi access point in your network somewhere, the operator is going to require you to have a Wi-Fi certified product. It's just a given because everybody knows that. Everybody knows what Wi-Fi certification is. And it's very, very clear on how those tests get done, who does those tests. And once you get it, check mark, you know it's going to work. In the broadband side of the industry, similar cable modems, same thing. Operators such as Rogers, Vodafone, Comcast, Charter here in the US, if they say, I'd like to have a new vendor that provides us new cable modems or new CMTSs or something like that on the cable side, it has to go through Cable Lab certification process. Because if it doesn't, they don't know that it's going to be interoperable and that it's going to work and it's going to meet the requirements. So they put it in the RFPs, to the point just a second ago, saying, you must have Cable Lab certification on this product. So again, it's a very well-known process. It's a very well-known testing that gets done. In that case, it only gets done in one location. You're not talking about 20 OTICs around the world. You're talking about one location where it all happens. But we need to figure out how to make that happen more like the Wi-Fi industry does. So yeah, definitely good, great thoughts.
Yeah, so kind of completely agree on the idea of, things kind of happening in the plug fest and stuff like that. But the challenge I've seen from that in UNH and interoperability about Lincoln Lavoie, that the plug fests tend to be kind of like a mark in time or something like that, and they haven't really focused as much on like building up things. And I'm gonna put a feather in the cap. I think it's fair to say that, our lab is one of the reasons that Ethernet is what it is today. It's the pluggability that has made it, anything works with anything, and the pie is the size that it is, because the vendor community committed to actually making that happen and building up the test beds. And when we look at what's happening in like the PlugFest activities, a lot of it's all one-offs, right? It's an instantaneous thing that happens, vendors get together, and then it kind of evaporates. And like what we've been trying to do at UNH is build an ongoing thing, make it get bigger and grow and bring more things into the fold, and then try to keep them there so that way it's a growing test bed and you're actually kind of growing the number of interoperability combinations that you can actually look at and focus on. Whereas you're not actually seeing that happen yet as much to date. And if like we want to actually see this be this thing where it's going to be multi-vendor and how we're going to do this, the industry has to commit to that and establishing that kind of test bed and promoting that ability to connect things together and actually do that interoperability testing. The second thing that was mentioned kind of like about the RFI side of stuff, yeah, we've got to, the operator community or the policymakers need to come together and actually help kick that ecosystem off, right? In some way, shape, or form, because otherwise vendors are not going to test just for the sake of testing to get a certification. Like the Wi-Fi vendors, they're not going to just do Wi-Fi testing for the sake of do Wi-Fi testing. They do it because it's become a requirement and a barrier into the market that they have to do it. So if we want to see the certification programs do that, then we actually need to see that happen and kick that process off, whether it's through policy, whether it's through incentives, whether it's through some other means. That's got to actually happen, or else the whole program will never actually start having that cycle.
Let me, before you leave, so stay up there because I have a question for you. So I'm going to talk for a moment, innovation fund in this process, which I'm part of. So when you say there needs to be a change of policy, are you talking about government policy? Are you talking about commercial policy? What do you mean in that regard?
So for example, like there was a discussion group yesterday from like USAID funding other, operators that may be in differing geographical regions. Mm-hmm. They have the ability to influence what those operators do. They have the ability to say, if you're going to do ORAN, look to the ORAN Alliance and the certification programs, or look to other XYZ thing, right? Build it into some of the things that are tied to policy or funding opportunities like that. It's not only what you're doing in like the NTIA plan and stuff like that. I forget the gentleman who was there, but there was a really great discussion of you can either fund kind of on the input to the system, like on the vendor side of creating the product or something like that and creating the supply, or you can try to incentivize on the consumption of it, right? So incentivizing the operators to pull in things that are tested like that or pull in certifications and such.
Okay, all right, I understand, thank you.
And just one comment on the PlugFest. My experience is exactly the same. We've done, I think we're on our 6th PlugFest right now, and every single time we sit down and say, what are we going to do this time? I don't know. What do you want to do? And that's the conversation we have. What do we have for dinner tonight? I don't know. What do you want? It's something we need to figure out and have a plan for. And this is the progression for example, RIC. Okay, we need to do more work on the RIC and get it to a point where it actually works for apps and everybody understands it and can develop to it, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the progression to get there? Over the next 2 years, we need to have PlugFest doing this, and this, and have a plan for it, which we don't have. So my experience is exactly the same.
I'm Tracy Van Brockel with AT&T and also a former acting co-chair of TIFG. And I'm here to first say that North American operators love the OTIC concept. Dish, Verizon, AT&T came together to sponsor, co-host quite a few of the North American OTICs. We're active contributors in the ORAN Alliance, obviously. We're beneficiaries of the PlugFest. And we're committed to work with everybody in this room so we do get the rock solid credential we want, like what you've done with Wi-Fi, what Lincoln has done in his lab with some of the things from Broadband Forum. We don't want to test all of this ourselves. We know it's very complicated. we're getting good ideas to build upon OTICs and build upon the specifications, all the good work that's going on with the ORAN Alliance. But, let's face it, the specifications are still under-specified. OTICs are great, but they're not yet sufficient. That will change over time if we all work together.
Yeah, great point. And I know that there's a lot of discussion between ORAN Alliance and TIP because I think there's probably still some gaps what the ORAN Alliance does in terms of the badging and certification of a specific product or a specific interface. But then how do you bring it all together? And I think that's a pretty big gap that the operators need to see filled because before they can put it in their network, they got to have assurance that the end-to-end integration is going to work, the performance is going to be at the right levels, and interoperability is taken care of. So those are some things that we still need to work on as well. Again, just my opinion that those gaps need to be filled somewhere past the OTICs, but before it gets to an operator.
Thank you. Abdel from Telecom Info Project. Yeah, just a bit of thoughts on the impact of testing. So I think the first question is, what's the value of these badges or the certifications that we have? Today, we have almost 20 OTECs. I've just checked now, there's 24 certifications. Okay, so there's 24 products that has been certified. If there's 136 companies within the ecosystem, so that's, it's only a fraction. I think it's going to be very difficult to mandate a certification if we don't reach the level of a plug and play. Right? So, and we don't have the market size for that. So Wi-Fi became a commodity, and it was clearly from the beginning that this would kind of kick off. So if there isn't the market for it, and vendors wouldn't be willing to come and just participate in the testing just for the sake of testing and certification. So I think the first stage would be to make sure that the actual certifications would give the confidence that these products are ready for deployments. And unless we reach to that level, then it will take, it wouldn't really kick off. Yeah, so that's just.
Great, thank you. No, I think it's a great comment. I made this comment in the main session yesterday or day before, whatever day it was, that at the end of the day, the OTICs are in business to make money. We're all here to make money. It's a business. We're not doing this just because it's fun. So how do we make them such that they can survive? Because that's not an easy question. Are there enough vendors? Are there enough products, interfaces, et cetera, operators to actually go do good things for the operators to make it happen? But it's not a charity. The government funding is going to run out at some point. So we got to figure out a way to make it sustainable over time. So great points.
Before Andreas talks with, I know he's very keen on how do these survive in the process, I-14Y. That came up last week when we were in Berlin for Broadband Working Week, was someone looked at the landscape, and this was more globally, is that ORAN is presently being supported by policy and by government funding in a bunch of different areas. It's not being supported by commercial ventures yet at the moment. And so that's an interesting question that Dave brings up, is that whether it's the Innovation Fund, whether it's the funding for I-14Y or Sonic, Charles, you're here, that sort of thing, that's not going to last forever. And so, especially in the area of testing, how do the test labs become self-sufficient? And that's sort of an interesting question. I think you're probably going to talk to.
So it seems you want to ask my question.
Yeah, well, no, I want to ask your answer.
So I want to go back to this statement about the Wi-Fi certificates and this is a subject of an RFQ process. So I think this is essential. And also for ORAN, and if we have a lot of discussions because it's not only DT partner in I-14Y, it's other operators as well. And we ask them for sure. And how to explain that politely. So the response was not very enthusiastic, let's say. So, and now the question is, what can we as ecosystem, as community do to bring it to a level. So there are elements that are, I think, not comparable to Wi-Fi. So it's a little bit different. Complexity and parameters so are different for different operators. It's not the case for Wi-Fi. However, if we want to bring a meaning to the certificates, we must come to a level that they say, you can enter the operator lab or the operational network if you have certificate and nothing else. So that seems to me a long route to go still, and happy to discuss that here. And if there are good ideas and proposals, we should aggregate and create a plan.
Yeah, fully agree. Fully agree. And I agree that Wi-Fi is not as complex and there's much more going on in LRAN. However, I will say that Wi-Fi has grown up that way and Wi-Fi is becoming more and more complex. So Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 8, the features, functions, and PHY layer concepts and things that have been implemented in Wi-Fi 7 and 8, it's going to make it more complex. So instead of growing up that way, we're actually trying to change how we do things as an industry.
I'm going to throw rocks at this.
Please
Like
do
if you're going to take the Wi-Fi analogy, the analogy for ORAN would be interoperability between the APs and a like managed controller for like an enterprise deployment, which doesn't exist
absolutely.
at all.
Yep.
It doesn't, and frankly, I'll probably make a couple of grumpy faces. It doesn't exist because the vendors have made sure it doesn't exist, right? It's about lock-in on that front. It's my controller that's deployed and it's my APs and I sell everything, right? And even in places where Wi-Fi Alliance has tried to establish stuff like Easy Mesh to try to make it so like, hey, I can get my gateway from service provider 1 and then start getting repeaters in the house, even that's not a thing yet, really, right? Like, again, the vendor community has done everything they can to make those things as like a managed system. That's the analogy, right? And like, if we're gonna see ORAN go exactly that same way, we know where that is. That's traditional RAN, right? It's completely siloed integration that's managed that way. And it's got some costs that come along with that and some pros and some cons. To steer the conversation a little bit differently now, there was a great part of the early presentation, and I'd love to have some discussion around it, versioning, right? Because we're even seeing this in the Plug Fest that we're doing now of like, you have an artifact from open source 1, an artifact from 2, you know, vendor tool, vendor solution, tool solution. They all come with differing versions. How do we solve that problem in this testing matrix, right? In a way from like the lab's perspective and the testing, as well as how the operators are going to kind of manage it for deployment.
Yeah, no, great comments. And fully agree with the Wi-Fi analogy. Where I come from, again, coming from where Cable Lab sits, Wi-Fi is an extension of the cable modem, which is interoperable and goes all the way back. So you have that managed service all the way through. So it is an end-to-end kind of a certification that all works. Wi-Fi to an enterprise, very different story. Fully agree.
Top of Flo's Layerspan, actually I have a strong background in the cable labs, the DOCSIS piece, and I think it fits quite well in this scenario. My last company did a lot of testing with cable labs. We did a lot of testing on the DOCSIS modem. We certified the DOCSIS modem with cable labs, and that reduced a huge amount of testing the operators had to go through. It didn't eliminate the operator testing. We still had to do operator testing, but our amount of testing at the operator side was much more simplified, and I think that's where we want to get to on the ORAN side. We want to get to a spot where we get through the OTEX labs, and then when we enter the operator lab, it's a much smaller set of tests that we have to run to get certification. That was my comment.
Yeah, fully agree. And that was kind of the point I was making is you have the baseline, you know it's going to work, you know it's going to be interoperable with XYZ vendors because you've done that, but there's still that gap between how do you take it from there into an operator network to see the performance that operator expects, and maybe there's some special sauce that operator uses for features, function, application. What do we do with that? Does the operator do that? Does the TIP do that? I know there's been discussion with TIP doing something along those lines. So those are kind of the questions that we need to figure out.
There will always be that gap, and I think that's okay. The only question is how big is that gap going to be? Is it 20% or 80%? And I think the cable industry has been very fortunate and strategic in creating cable labs in the first place many years ago, and then funding it, you know, and then saying this is the authoritative source, and we will not let any product into our networks without it. But that's a very unique understanding of how certification goes in the cable industry. All other industries see certificates as like a nuisance, which you need to fulfill in order to tick that one box, and nobody really cares for the contents, right? So to be a little provocative. So and generally speaking, I think certification cannot steer innovation. Certification is usually a minimum baseline. Again, the cable industry might be a noticeable exception because you guys set challenging test plans and you say the next DOCSIS level requires you to step up, but that's not normally the case. And the cycles to create new versions of certifications and agree industry-wide will also in our industry here take awfully long and usually take too long to steer the innovation. So either we overcome that problem with certification or we create something in addition. Let's say we have the minimum baseline, but we also need to establish some common understanding. For example, how do we want to proceed with optimization of the networks? We cannot hope to get a certification for rig testing next year. It's just way too complex. It hasn't been fully understood. There is no minimum baseline. That's agreed. But we still need to align on the testing because if we don't, then everybody here will make the same experiences in their lab and it will be a huge waste of energy. Right? So certification, yes, but what is our aspiration there? And also Cable Labs is a very unique situation because it's basically one big organization which controls the whole thing. And of course, here we have many labs and none of us would want to hear the message, okay, by the way, end of next year when NTIA funding or whenever it's going to run out, all of you will go out of business. We'll pick one. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a huge massacre. So we also need to find a way how we can benefit from all the wealth of the experience and continue having the existence of multiple labs meaningfully and not just competing. And that's one of the biggest problems with the OTICs. There are just so many, and they think, oh, this is a ticket to making money. Let's just offer certificates. But there are 20 OTICs, and I don't know just an equally sized number of vendors in the market.
Yeah.
So that's the management is also difficult.
The question I would raise in that is that, yeah, there are multiple OTICs, and, you know, I'm going to speak now for my, personally, not anything to do with the government. So, Julie, you heard me say that, okay? So, that they serve different purposes. As Lincoln said, and as David has also said, that there's some for developmental, some for certification, and that sort of thing. So it's really a matter of being willing to define where you are and what it is, the services that you care to provide in the process. And the other part, and I know that Accord is starting to look at this, is the concept of how do you federate these systems? How do you federate these labs? And that, I don't mean that everybody pays money into one thing and there's an Uber leader in the process, but I'm just saying that everybody's going to be doing a certain amount of the same testing. And I agree that what you're trying to do is do all the testing that we used to call testing to death until we finally got into the carrier lab. But is there a movement, should there be a movement towards more federation of this activity so that we do know that all labs that want to are doing a certain set of this baseline testing in a same and similar manner with same or similar results?
So just a thought, in the spirit of not boiling the ocean, we talk a lot about certification, and in the ORAN parlance, we've limited certification to the interfaces, right? Whether your ORU front haul is certified or DU certified. So that's a good start. It's a minimum. It's necessary but not sufficient. We all recognize that. I mean, the MVP work in Addis, the G5, European MOU, have done a great job of pooling kind of requirements across multiple operators. Like why don't we focus on really, at the end of the day, operators want to see, I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, like, deployable systems. And in order to get there, I think maybe we should focus on system level certification. Like the whole thing together, you do want to see open front haul, you put it as a requirement, but then you actually, the main effort of every OTIC is to support the region in that area and say, these are the operators, these are the blueprints from these MVPs, why don't we collect the cohort, and vendors would want to participate in that, because once you've collected that cohort for a system level certification, it becomes a much easier forklift into the operator lab and say, okay, I've seen you pass the most basic stuff. Now I'm going to add my operator specific requirements. Like, it's again, going back to Wi-Fi and cable, and I mean, they're kind of fairly simple systems, and they're kind of very focused on that particular, whether it's an air interface or the modem. But in this case, it's a complex system. Let's just admit it. Let's use certificates where it's useful, maybe just to say that, I'm compliant, but then ultimately it's about system level. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And just to add to it, there's also another part of the industry that's trying to do this same thing at the same time. And so maybe could be some cross-pollination there, and that's the optical space. Because right now, whether you're ITU, ITF, optical, there's not a lot of interoperability among vendors between the different IDUs, ODUs, et cetera. And we Cable Labs and the rest of the industry as well, trying to figure out how to make that a better process. So it's not vendor lock-in. It's not operator has to do everything. Can we do something? And we're starting to do some interoperability work around opticals as well. So there's not just ORAN that's trying to figure this out, and the mobile side, but the optical side is trying to do it as well, and try to figure out how to do things a little bit differently, maybe a little bit better. So absolutely.
No more questions. Okay. Oh, good. We can always count on Ku. Come on, Ku.
Hello, good morning. This is Ku, Keysight, ORAN Test Integration Focus Co-Chair as well. So just to build on top of Yen's point, so we discussed this, we brought this point up yesterday as in the, so now we look at the ORAN conformance, interoperability, and as well as end-to-end test cases, right? And we talk about certification and badging schemes from ORAN Alliance. But at the same time, we got to look at the bigger picture in terms of like, what are the test areas which are needing to be covered, right? Across a single DUT, the interfaces, and then from a functional, performance, security, energy efficiency, savings, and as well as other areas that we need to look at. So I think we need to list those out, and it's not just those, right? In terms of like 3GPP features testing as well, because ORAN will need to be tested for any 3GPP features, release 16, 17, 18, that the operators want ORAN to support. So I think we need to list out all those areas, and then after that, maybe stick a matrix, on top of it and say, which of the labs are potentially going to be covering which level of testing. Is that the functional testing? Is that like the innovation testing? Is that the performance testing? Is that the resiliency or robustness testing? Then we can start to map the labs to each one of these areas. I say maybe some labs, they would like to focus on validating ORAN for NTN, release 17, as an innovation project, versus massive MIMO, multi-user MIMO optimization in C-bands for deployments. So I think once we worked out this landscape, I think we can try to look at even, I think the OTICs will benefit. That's where I want to be able to focus on for this year, and I want to be able to expand into these other areas for next year. And this could be a way for OTICs to collaborate as well, because I was thinking of like, Airbus and Boeing, they don't build, all parts of the planes and assemble them in one plant. Right, some of the countries in Europe will start to look at designing, building the wings versus the engine and stuff like that. And then they'll start to ship the components together and test them. But then obviously, Boeing, Airbus, they need to have like the entire blueprint. They'll say, okay, this is what it takes, right, basically to build the plane, to test it, to assemble it. I think as an industry, we need to come together to figure out in terms of like, how do we actually want to be able to deliver solutions to the operators from a productization standpoint, commercial deployment standpoint, break this down, and then have a clear metrics. Then we can start to look at having labs, right, to be inserting themselves into different places within that metrics. Thank you.
That's a great point. We talked kind of a tangential thing yesterday. We were in the breakout with training with just a few of us there talking about training. And if we assume that all OTICs do everything, the question was, well, how do we help new labs develop and come up to speed and learn how to do these things? And the question we started discussing was, well, why would we do that? If all of a sudden we're training our competitor because there's a limited number of vendors that want to come and test systems. So if I go out as an OTIC and I help another entity develop their lab and train them up and they're ready to go, I just lost some of my own business. So again, going back to the business question, how do we do that and how do we make sure? And I think the point is an excellent point. Maybe the better way to do it is focus each OTIC in a certain different area. So you're not doing a lot more, a lot of the competition, what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, who's going to do it, kind of a thing.
If I may add, I think this helps to build the competency and expertise as well. For example, things like ART testing, accept testing, AI/ML areas, right? It takes years to be able to get to that level of experience. So going back to the point that Lincoln was actually sort of raising, like if you are basically a OTIC that you want to focus in this specific area, then I think you always have a test bed, you always have vendors coming to your lab, right? They have continuous integration, development, testing, optimization over time. I think that can help, right, as an industry for us to look at, okay, these are the OTICs, right, which are basically focusing in these areas, those areas. And I think the OTICs expertise as well, not just in terms of the test equipment, the test setup, you will grow over time, right, because you build experience and expertise.
Yeah, great comment, thanks.
This is great, Yavi speaks, Keysight speaks, the whole thing is complete.
Done.
Okay, so, I'm going to speak about something that is completely different and, it may be completely out of place, really. As I said, we are the open source people. And, the topic of my breakout is CI/CD/CT. So I don't know, I hope I'll have, I'll listen and, I'll hear what people, what people's perspective is on that rather than giving our pre-cooked, our own perspective. So, what we do, even if it's open source and, people may consider it educational and academic and all those kinds of things. In fact, we are working very, very closely with the industrial partners. And, the way we operate is our software we actually deploy, right? It gets deployed into what we call a CD network, right? It's a campus network. And not just us, many, many campus networks are deployed based on the software that we produce. It's just that, the value of it may not be for the tier one kind of use cases that we are talking about here or the ORAN industry in general. But it does serve a certain number of vendors too. Companies that are producing ORUs have other markets. There are smaller companies who are addressing other vertical markets, and they are really adopting the ORAN architecture. So, what we implement is, in fact, with all the interfaces that you have here in the ORAN architecture, plus they conform to, the test cases, because we also work closely with the, real test, serious test companies. So, yeah, I don't know, if this fits in. Obviously, it sits to one side of all of the rest of the discussion. But, all this is creating a lot of value in our understanding. And maybe, what we should be considering is not just the, vendors producing equipment, the big ones, and then, handing it over to the service providers that also happen to be big ones. There's a lot in the middle, other markets, other spaces in which all of this is probably relevant. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I see we still have a few people in line, so I don't want to make any more or too many more comments from up here. We want to make sure the audience has a chance to talk, so please go ahead.
Hi, Ganesh from Redisys. I have a couple of points to make. One is about the PlugFest, I believe. In addition to the number of OTICs which are there globally and the number of combinations we are trying every PlugFest, to me it looks like we've been participating since the first PlugFest in 2019. It has become more a competition of numbers in terms of the number of vendors in each of the OTIC labs participating in the PlugFest twice in a year. And I believe at some point we're going to get bored of this number of kaleidoscopic combinations of vendors which we are seeing. And if the real objective of the PlugFest is going to be on the innovation side, these PlugFests have to go a little deeper and longer. Maybe that's an efficient use, probably with lesser number of entries in the PlugFest. And of course, we are slowly moving towards team-based PlugFest, right? And otherwise, if you are doing simple combinations of interops, I don't think there is adding too much value. And it is putting actually a lot of stress on the vendor side and the labs as well on finishing all of these test cases in these combinations, right? The second point is about the certification or badges. I believe the system level testing or the end-to-end testing should be given more focus than the node level or interface level interops and certificates or badges. So that will at least make it closer to deployment, and the test cases or the test specifications have to be expanded to include more operator priority features so that that can be adding value to the operators when they evaluate the products for deployment.
Excuse me, thank you very much, appreciate it. Go ahead.
I'm Tony from Alliance. We are the RU vendor. Actually, 3 years ago, we are single ORAN vendor because we have our RU and the CUDU. So it was like in the past few years, honestly speaking, we seldom been asked whether we have ORAN certificate because I echo all those speakers. The end-to-end is the most important, make the end-to-end work. So, but I would say PlugFest is very important and also the IoT profile because it make the interoperability mature. After 3 years, we participated in the PlugFest. We can connect to the CU, DU very quick, maybe 1 to 3 days, make it work. But the most difficult part is performance test. It's take months to improve the performance of the CU, DU, and the RU. So I would like to echo the Mr. Gao's comments. Not only the ORANs, the interface test, the 3GPP feature and the function test is also important. Honestly, we for example, the core set, the parameter will actually impact the performance, but it's not in the ORAN specification. But how to figure out the parameters setting to improve the performance? We needed to use a lot of equipment, the SASG, the UE simulator, the DU simulator, to try to find out what impact the performance. So that's very costly. So that's we also found seeking the funding. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And just going back to 2022 and 2023 with the 5G challenge that we did with ITS, that's was one of the key learnings is the parameters, the profiles, and such are probably the most important thing to know ahead of time. Otherwise, you're spinning your wheels because you think this person or this entity is going to give you something that they're not giving you, and the whole thing falls apart, or the performance isn't where it is, and it takes hours and hours and hours to try to troubleshoot and figure out who's not passing the parameter. And turns out both are right. Both are doing it according to one of the options of the specification, and yet things aren't working right. And that's so it's very key that we need to make sure that we take that into account and are looking at the performance.
I agree. There was no doubt that, if you look at it, it's configurations. And how do you define those configurations? In the end, how could you create something that you auto-configure in the process? But that's exactly the point that comes up, and that's why integration becomes much harder. We'll also say that obviously the ORAN Alliance specifications have a whole bunch of optional stuff. We call it conditional mandatory or other sort of things. And still to this day, you'll see where an information element is maybe optional, but one person says, okay, I'm not going to do it at all. The other party on the other end of that interface says, well, we want to see something. We don't care what it is, but we want to see something. And it falls apart. So as we start, that brings back to this whole concept, whether, I'm going to be, again, a personal opinion, I don't like the word blueprint because I feel like it's limiting in the process of an ORAN environment, but I do understand the definition of a deployment model. And I think when we start looking at this, and especially if we can consider how all the labs could work together with operators that will potentially use this ORAN equipment, is let's figure out what those deployment models are and how do they rotate back into the specifications and especially in the IoT profiles and that sort of thing, so that we've got something we know we're all testing. And it goes back to the question of the baseline. There's the baseline. If we've got a deployment model for a macro-urban environment, great, we've now got that deployment model. And we can now streamline the testing, automate the testing, and get over this hurdle of the concept that you've got to be tested for this period of time before you're finally certified that you can actually come into the lab, into the carrier lab, and really be tested against their specific profile. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to cut that time down because that also cuts down the cost. So that allows, from an NTIA standpoint, to have a diverse supply chain because people haven't spent millions of dollars trying to get to that point.
Yeah, we have just a time check. We have 2 minutes. I know Jeremy's going to cut somebody off, so it looks like we're not going to talk anymore. We have 2 more people. We'll let them make their comments, and then we'll move forward with Jeremy.
Hey, hi, this is Ku again. Just make it quick. So I think it's actually good that ATIS has released the first version of the MVP profile. I would say maybe as an industry, I'm not sure whether ATIS has any plans to work on test cases or test plans to be able to use to validate those profiles. Otherwise, this may be a call to the industry players or companies who are basically interested to get together to develop test case and test plans for those profiles, especially for performance numbers or parameters which are specified in those profiles that we can try to maybe look at implementing those for the next Plugfest. Thank you.
I do have to add, Jeremy. So just on the ASMVP, it does not specify any new specifications. It's based on ORAN and 3GPP specifications and including the IoT profiles, which the release that's done right now does not include the IoT profiles. That's what we're working on for the next few months in the process. And there are performance parameters and values, not in every case, but they're there.
Good morning, Scott Fox with the Department of Defense, Future G. I lead our 5G and cyber subject matter expert teams. Over the last several years, we've been focusing on looking at and removing barriers to the advancement and broad adoption of Open RAN. One of those, we're constantly asked to kind of finance more testing capabilities. And my response is always, what do you currently have today? And what is the demand? Right? And how diverse is what you have? A couple of years ago, we worked with the National Spectrum Consortium to do a study to assess the current capabilities. I'm wondering if anyone's been evolving that study so that there's a central repository of the current capabilities in North America and even outside North America to support testing and what that looks like, right? Because if there's more requests for money to support additional capabilities, there'll need to be that justification of what do you have and why do you need more, right? And so on that note, and one crazy thought I have is, who's making money in Open RAN today, right? The equipment, the test equipment vendors seem to be making money. So maybe they could, and no, seriously, and they have a vested interest in tracking this stuff. I'm going to be a little controversial. This is confounding to me, right? I'm excited because I want everybody to make money, and I'm not trying to pick on the equipment vendors. This is not DOD, but this is I'm making a suggestion. Right? It'll soon be a DOD position if I'm effective, right? But the point is, I think it's really important to have a central database. It's accurate. Who's doing what? What are they currently capable of? Not what are they planning in the future, so that the community has access to real information and understands who's open for business and who's not, who does security and who doesn't, right? And so I think there needs to be a central third party that provides that capability. So it's less, maybe a question. The question is, who is that going to be and how can we help?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, I don't have an answer, and I won't give my own personal thoughts on it because I do have a couple personal thoughts. But Jeremy's going to take us off the stage, so I will pause here and let Jeremy take over for breaking us out into our breakout sessions.
Talk about being effective.
You can just sit here.
I'm not sitting. Oh, okay. All right, let's thank David and Lauriston for that discussion. Thank you very much. Since we're having fun with disclaimers this morning, I've got one of my own. Certain commercial equipment, components, and hardware and software may be identified in this symposium to specify adequately the technical aspects of the topic. In no case does such identification imply recommendation or endorsement by the National Telecommunications Information Administration, NTIA, nor does it imply that the equipment or technology identified is necessarily the best available for the particular application or uses. I should have said that at the beginning, not at the end of a technical
Before you let me
conference.
talk, yeah.
At any rate, yes, let's not go there. I tried not to say that. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead into the discussions. We have, again, 6 breakout rooms. The locations are the same. The principles and the requests of participation remain the same. Here's a quick reminder. Don't read the slide. Okay. Read this slide. All right. So the breakout topics 1, 2, and 3 are on the slide. 1, 2 will be in this room. I believe 1 is still over here on the stage left, and 2 is in the backstage right. Number 3 is out in the hallway again at the tables in salon foyer. 4, 5, and 6. Kathy, help me out real quick. 4 says salon EH. Yesterday, 4 and 5 were in Monarch. Can somebody go in the hallway and yell Kathy? There's no other means to resolve this. Say that again. So 3 and 4 are over there.
Yeah, you remember we don't have the policy team over there today.
Okay, 3 is EH and 4 is EH.
2 in the same place.
Kind of like it here.
3 and 4 are out in the hallway. In ENH. Oh, so in the room. Okay. All right. There was a knowledgeable voice over here that I ignored. Sorry, Larson. Okay. And then 5 is Keystone and 6 is Monarch. So 6, you're not going downstairs in the basement. You're going out to Monarch where we ate lunch yesterday. And Keystone, I believe, is down the hallway. Next is Telluride. Okay. Clear as mud? All right, let's do breakouts. Breakout leaders, please excuse your participants at, let's see, 11:15 for a break. We will reconvene here along with our virtual audience at 11:30. Thank you. All right, welcome back into the room and welcome back our virtual audience. This is a main discussion session. We are reconvening to report out from the breakout sessions and form an action plan. So here to lead our discussion back is David Debrecht from Cable Labs and Lauriston Harden from NTIA ITS to replace Mark Paletti on the agenda. Take it away.
Thanks a lot. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll just jump straight into the readouts, and then if there's any further discussion from the readouts, we can do that. There are a couple of audibles we had to call for these sessions. The first one is the order of the readout. We have someone that's needing to catch a flight a little earlier than expected, so we're going to start with topic number 5. So Hasib is going to take us through the decoupling service management orchestration SMO topic and give us his 5-minute readout.
You heard that 5-minute, right?
Yes, I don't think we need 5 minutes. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Chair, for letting me jump the line. So we had this decoupled SMO testing, testability of it. And a quick intro, those who don't understand or know are not familiar with what decoupled SMO is. So decoupled SMO is that it consists of SMO services inside the SMO, and they communicate in service-based architecture as consumers and producers. So you can have different type of SMO services such as service orchestration, service assurance, topology. The non-real-time RIC could be also one of the services. So we talked about how do we test those services and what does it mean to us. So there are many suggestions and many discussions, but I think the main, I guess one of the main takeaway from me was what my fellow colleague from Verizon said, that you always trust the vendor, but verify. So, so that's the key aspects that we have to we have to verify. It is important that it is properly tested. So then we talked about things like how do we make the community-based testing meaningful and useful for the stakeholders, including the operators. So we said that there has to be, first of all, good specs, the specs that talk about or describe the minimum set of test requirements, which in the common knowledge or in the ORAN terminology, we can think of that IoT profiles that that we have in ORAN. So one of the things that immediately came up that in the decoupled SMO, for each SMOS, there will be APIs. So we need IoT profiles for those APIs. So that would be a minimum set of APIs requirements that needs to be included in those IoT. And then we want to be able to test that minimum set. And then there was a lot of enthusiastic feedback from the participants to create a crowdsource, open source reference design script based on the spec. So basically, we want to develop a system of open source, crowdsource-based scripting that everybody will know about, so that everybody, the vendors know what to test. And I'm using OTIX here as a synonym for test center. So it could be, ORAN test center, it could be an independent test center, it could be a government test center, it could be, think of your ABCD, whatever test center, right? So then in those test centers, there will be this script developed, and that will be shared across those test centers. And then those minimum set or the IoTs could be tested there as the baseline of verification. Now, we also agreed that there is no business model for that yet. So we need to work very diligently and smartly to come up with a business model for that specific type of scripting that can make sense and create businesses for everybody and meaningful revenue and all that. So then comes to our next step. So I categorically asked our esteemed operators that after the IoT testing, there will be a lot of features in the interface that needs to be tested. Is it mandatory for you all to test those features? And there was a resounding yes, that yes, we have to test those features because something will break if we did not. And then this wisdom came, or the wisdom that I got, trust but verify, is needed for the operators to make sure that we go through the next level of testing. So that was the number 2 of our conclusion, that then the operators will invite you to their lab and do the testing until they're satisfied, and to nth level of verification and validation. And it could be in the lab, it could be in the field, or both. Okay, then we talked about lifecycle management, because that's an important part of the testing aspect, that how do you do lifecycle management after we have done this testing, and then if you quote unquote dirty the test by adding new features to your software, then how do you make sure that you have validated that again? So there are 2 aspects of it. If the testing or if the software is increased, or version has increased, or new feature has been added to the software on the deployed product, which is already deployed by the operators, and you are just upgrading the software, adding new features, but you kept the same spec, no changes in the spec, but you added some new extra gravy into your application or what have you, into your product. In that scenario, it will be between the operators and vendors to decide how that will be tested, where that will be tested, to what degree of regression or even full testing that would be done. So this is really something that not much the community can do in that scenario. Now, if there's a spec change, so the ORAN decides to create a new IoT profile or new API, for example, versions the API with new features. In that case, we repeat the whole process. So we basically go through the step number 1 of creating a new new minimum set of IoT, crowdsource, open source, all the good thing, business model, and then the operator will test after that minimum set until they're satisfied. And then we continue with that cycle. So that was the summary of what we agreed on. There were many other ideas and a lot of good discussions, which I think I already exhausted my time, but maybe for some other time.
Great.
The one thing I really take from that, Azib, is this concept of crowdsourcing scripts. And that's something I'll just say from my side, hadn't even thought of yet. So it's very interesting how we move from IoT profiles through to actually how do we crowdsource scripts that everybody can use. That's interesting concept. Yes, the business case is not strong yet, but that's interesting.
Yep, thanks. And we'll hear more about lifecycle management with that team when that happens. Thank you. Hopefully you make your flight. Good luck. So we're going to go back to the top. Number one, the group number one, do small lab to lab differences produce large differences in results. And Lincoln is going to give us a readout of that one.
Pull up the page here. So we had a really good discussion amongst the group for this overall. We kind of took the approach of a traditional kind of root cause analysis, which for those that are familiar with accredited type programs and stuff like that, when you have a deficiency, you kind of keep asking the question of why and how until you uncover where the deficiency came from that. So rather than kind of talking to the obvious of, yeah, if there's a difference, then you create a lab-to-lab difference, which is a fairly obvious yes. It's more of what are the causes of that difference? And so we were able to identify, I think, a number of places to that. And actually, I think it kind of speaks to some of the actions that we know are either ongoing or coming out of there. Specifically, first and foremost, places where the test plans don't fully specify the test environment. They don't specify the configuration in all cases. Some obvious cases for things like RF or channel models and stuff like that. So places where you may have things that are tested in a good environment, tested in a poor environment, but that it's unspecified. Obviously, as we move towards performance testing, those things will become even more critical. And it would be impossible to reproduce results without those. Other places would be, exacting configuration parameters, even some places where you can see things inside the core causing issues on performance in the RAN. Where those aren't necessarily specified. And then lastly, another area that came up was test plans should define things like confidence intervals. So repeatability even inside a single lab, like run the test case twice. If it passes once and it fails once, you don't have high confidence in either the test implementation or the system under test in that consistency. If you pass 3 times in a row, your confidence interval goes way up. Along the similar lines, standardizing and kind of better organizing the reporting guidelines, right? So exact definitions of KPIs that are recorded out of a system, including units and definition of that. So the really simple example of this, if you think about like throughput, are you talking throughput of the TCP payload? Are you talking throughput of the IP payload? What is the exacting definition, and be very specific on that. Similarly, ensuring configuration parameters or specific parameters for the equipment is called out. So things even beyond just the IoT profile. So any tuning that you did to the system, any additional steps to do that tuning should be called out as part of that results report. Shouldn't be abstracted or hidden away. Another cause of the difference is there's a lot of configuration options that come to play in integration. These aren't necessarily always fully specified in things like the IoT profiles from WG4. There's additional things that you have integration points between devices, and if those aren't the same when you're trying to repeat testing between 2 labs, that could be difference. Testing tools. So on testing tools, we kind of talked a little bit about the idea of method of implementations, essentially mapping from the test plan to test tool specifics, right? So if you've got parameters or configurations that are called out in the method of procedure, they might be named very differing things in the test tool, or maybe there's a couple of different ways to set things inside the test tool. That obviously has a lot of input from the tool vendors and stuff like that, but having some stuff and definitions that say for this specific tool, this is exactly how you execute on that test plan will assist things. Similarly, having detailed definition of some type of calibration process. So as you stand up a tool for the first time, how do you ensure that that tool is actually fully running in the lab according to the expectations from the vendor and stuff like that before you even start doing the testing. And then lastly, we had a quick discussion around things like the ever popular ISO 17025 and lab accreditation. But I want to circle back around to the thing we kind of took at the top. Accreditation will only get you so far if the test plans aren't good, because all it will ensure is that if the test plan is ambiguous, it'll ensure that I as a lab am very good at following an ambiguous test plan. It won't solve any of the ambiguities in the test plan, right? So again, root cause analysis, we've got to solve those issues. So some of the things that we're kind of seeing being done now, like, with, I think, contributions that we're expecting coming out of some of the NTIA awards will go into CRs in ORAN Alliance for things like specifying channel models, like specifying some of the KPIs and stuff like that. So I think from our perspective, this is definitely moving in the right direction with some of the stuff, but we have more work to do, right? Like on the reporting guidelines and kind of tightening a lot of that data up so that we actually have a consistent way of ensuring that we're talking about the same thing.
Great. Sounds like a good discussion, so thanks. Appreciate it. All right, we'll jump down to the next one, which is probably one of the most open-ended questions that I've seen so far. What factors matter most? So Tim's going to give us a readout on the discussion and where that led the group right now for group number 2.
All right, well, thank you for the very open-ended question. It means we can decide whatever we want, which is, so overall, I think we decided, what matters in testing, and I think we were in the OTIC testing mode after all the discussions today, primarily as our thinking is that really, for this to work, the OTICs need to improve the cost, speed to market and the perceived value of testing for everyone in the ecosystem. And so a big piece of that is establishing kind of more meaningful and trusted outcomes and metrics that the whole industry can rely on and have a lot of confidence in those results. So we also thought that, beyond a lot of the current compliance tests, there's a lot of value in establishing these third-party verified performance metrics and KPIs, which are really important when selecting, obviously, the components in your system. And that also, to the configuration topic that's been discussed, better documenting some of the configurations and versions that led to different test results would be very valuable for folks as they're looking at, the options in the ecosystem. Then we kind of thought through a little bit about, specifically for who, because there's kind of, I guess, 3 main entities in this ecosystem. There's the OTICs and test labs, the vendors that are building components, and then the operators that are deploying, systems based on these components, and thought about this kind of per entity. And so for OTICs, we clearly need this ability to run really consistent and meaningful tests that will be trusted by the wider industry, and consistent, of course. And then clearly they need this sustainable revenue model such that this can persist and continue indefinitely. For vendors, the main functions here are, for vendors to want to go to OTIC labs, they need to know that the tests are meaningful and that they're going to lead to business opportunity. So if I don't really want to go test things in an OTIC unless I know that that's going to help me, bring something to market and has value. And similarly, having a kind of a fair third-party platform to stack performance metrics and KPIs of different products against each other in a way that can help the industry kind of decide what components to use. So really it has to kind of present this meaningful value and cost and time savings for vendors, and similarly for operators. And then so for operators, clearly they need results that are meaningful in terms of they can look at the results and the KPIs, and that can help them with their product selection very quickly. And it should be able to offload some of their own testing. So if we're doing this right, OTICs and shared labs, should be able to reduce the amount of internal testing and validation that operators have to do. So then the last kind of piece here is, we really need to arrive at this ecosystem where all three of these things happen. All these elements benefit. And so kind of some of the ideas we had towards that were, expanding some of the tests, of course, but certainly focusing on the most critical ones. And I think discussed that kind of the MVP is trying to help select, some of those things, but there's certainly different ways to do that. There's also kind of the possibility that, and I think this has already been mentioned, is that some sorts of software test suites or, some open source tools could really help to align a very distributed test ecosystem such that labs can share test software and test suites that are exactly the same and are repeatable and trusted and open for OTICs and vendors and operators all to verify and, have trust in. And then we certainly need more realistic and mature test cases. So I think certainly one of the things we see today is that operators have, very mature test suites for their use cases. And so we need to get some of these, very high quality tests back into kind of the more broad testing that OTICs and vendors can do earlier in the process, kind of in a trusted way. Again, to offload the different repeated, operator testing that needs to go on in the end. We just discussed a little bit about how, maybe OTICs could do some specialization into different areas, which I think we talked about before, but one of the areas we thought about was like also in things like certification. So like if certain labs could help streamline the FCC, device certifications and things like that, this could be a way that, could also really help the process. And also that, there's a lot of different types of operators out there between macro, private 5G use cases, and also like DoD use cases. And so certainly you might have some specialization of different subsets of test types for those different kind of classes of users that the different OTICs specialize in. And then hopefully, doing all of this can just accelerate the whole feature velocity for all three in the ecosystem. And yeah, so those were kind of our thoughts on what matters and how could we really make this whole ecosystem work and sustainable.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Sounds like another really good conversation. The next, yes, please.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was hoping to do that at the end, if there was time, but yes, absolutely. I'm tracking the time, and I think we'll be okay for 5 to 10 minutes of final questions. So the next speaker is actually one we had to make a last-minute shift on because there weren't enough people in the What Factors Can Be Ignored group, because I don't think anybody thinks anything can be ignored. So we made the audible that group 3 and 4 did a combined. So how does the priority of features for commercializations impact testing? That group is going to come out and do the readout. So sit here if you want to come on up and do your thing. And there will be some parts of what factors can be ignored in that prioritization.
Thank you. So I think I tried to put a summary online quickly, but please take a look at that online as well. So I think we discussed a few key items in the session. I think the first item was feature prioritization and test impact. So from a prioritization angle, we discussed that there would be variation of prioritization depending on whom you talk to. I mean, from operator to operator, between vendors, between system integrators, suppliers, I think all of them would have different views. And then we also have to look into from a deployment angle. I mean, both there will be ORAN related features, there would be 3GPP related features, How do you consider that in your prioritization? And again, even on the feature side, there would be features related to functional priorities that almost every operator needs, like throughput features, latency features, energy efficiency features, as well as operational priorities for operators, like, for example, making sure things are stable, you have the analytics, the FCAPs, and aspects related to that. So how do we do all that for testing? And I think there has been some effort, I think the group discussed for this kind of prioritization. I think in Europe, there is the MOU with G5 for looking at priorities. And now we discussed MVPC and ATIS putting some work in that area. But I think the discussion in the group was, we don't have this for all geos. Maybe if you look at, I don't know, Africa or South America or some other maybe we should first maybe have a collection of such operator consensus across all geos, and then that would be probably the first step that the group agreed on. And the second step would be trying to see if there can be further harmonization so that we kind of come to a common understanding of features that we could try to then have our labs focus for testing, which could then reduce the efforts on the operator side for their validations. I think this was the first item that we discussed. The second item that we discussed was, okay, that is the view of priority view at time T0, but I mean, priorities always change. Features keep evolving. 3GPP comes with new features. ORAN comes with new features and interfaces. So how do we kind of keep up from a test perspective for these items? So I think the group discussed that, of course, I mean, evolution needs to be considered, but baselining is a very important first step. So I think once we have the baselining that we discussed that we just discussed, I think the question is now, how do we look at roadmaps? So for example, when we look at ORAN now, we have been finishing release 4, now release 5 is coming. Similarly with operators, like the MOUs and all that we talked about, there must be some plan that is coming. So how do you kind of plan this well? Because especially in a multi-vendor scenario, looking at priorities so that everybody starts aligning themselves in that direction. So how can we do that from a test perspective to keep up to this new evolution? And also test plans. So once you have all these features, then test plans need to be updated, and the process for updating the test plans and should be clarity. Needs to be clarity and transparency in that, so that you know what is coming up next, and then everybody sees, okay, this is the direction from all the operators. This is the direction of this is the roadmap that is coming, so you can plan your tests accordingly. So this would minimize some of the discussions we just had in the previous session where we talked about the OTICs and PlugFest, and we don't know what to test next. So having this kind of view could help. The other issue is, again, when we talk about features and upgrades, there can be different timescales. So for example, some features may require new hardware, and the hardware refresh cycles may be slower. For example, a radio at the top of a tower, you may want to keep it for 10 years, but maybe you have a little bit more flexibility in upgrades at the bottom of the tower or at a data center. And maybe the software upgrades for features and functionalities maybe can happen at a much faster time scale. So again, how do you do that in your prioritization and planning? The third item we discussed was on lifecycle management of features from a commercialization standpoint. I know there have been other parallel discussions on this topic as well, but I think the key item we were discussing there was the asynchronous updates across vendors in a multi-vendor setup, because you have your own, as a vendor, maybe you may have your own release cycle of updates, but then that release cycle may not tie in with the other people that are again releasing their updates. So how do you actually do that in your test cycle and manage that? And I think some of the interesting points that came up in the session was related to perhaps AI ML can help, and maybe that can help with also helping identify, not only with issue identification, but also maybe test case prioritization, which test cases we should use here. And we also discussed the upgrades and downgrades process, and maybe automation could be another important aspect here from a lifecycle management and validation aspect. I think the last item we discussed was prioritization of new features that is still pending commercialization, but there is a lot of interest. So one of the examples that came up in the discussion was the near-RT RIC and XAPS, for example, energy savings. And I think the discussion again in the session evolved around the fact that maybe test plans are all not fully baked and clean in that space. The test procedures still need further clarity. But there was also discussion that ORAN came up with a list of priority test cases, use cases for XApps and things like that in the use case task group. But the operators and also, the whole point of RIC and XApps and RApps is to encourage innovation. But innovation, somebody may come up with a completely brand new idea for doing that. And how do you that? That's no test plan for that. So then how do you, because many of the features may have impact on the interfaces, may have impact on the PMs and counters that the RAN needs to provide. So again, how do you manage that? I don't think, again, we ran out of time. And when there were other discussion points also that came up in the meeting, I think all that is captured. If any of you who are in the session feel that something is not captured properly, please email me. I'm happy to update the notes. Thank you very much.
Great. And last but not least, this has come up like 3 times in the 3 different groups already, lifecycle management. So we'll hit this as the last topic, and then we should have 5 to 10 minutes for questions. But we'll ask Irfan to come in and talk lifecycle management, CI/CD, CT.
Thank you very much. So, hi, I'm Irfan Gauri from Open Air Interface. So, I did hear some terms here in the discussions before, neutral ground and end-to-end. So, it may be that we may have some of the answers for you. Our discussion was around this CI/CD CT topic. Now, this is something that has been discussed extensively in the ORAN open source focus group, where I co-chair with Tracy. And this has also got connects with the 5G super blueprint idea that comes from another community, Linux Foundation networking. So, what we have been trying to say to ourselves is that given that open source communities have matured over the last few years, and lots of components of all kinds, including orchestration, automation, projects like Nefio, Silva, etc., are available in the open source communities. And then the ORAN open source community itself has got, quite a number of components north of RAN, RIC, etc., SMO itself. And then, open source also produces CUDU. The only component that is missing right now is, of course, the radio, which is a commercial radio in this integration. We have the capability of building this blueprint or showcase, whatever you may want to call it, or CI/CD CT framework. So, this was sort of the topic that we were trying to address and trying to understand, what exactly all these 3 steps mean, and what's the underlying work that needs to be carried out there, and who are the stakeholders. Now, in the discussion that ensued, that followed, we are talking about 2 stakeholders, right? And we already spoke about the open source, 3 stakeholders, in fact. The open source communities themselves, the ones that we spoke about, or others that are producing relevant stuff for the showcase, and then labs that are deploying the end-to-end. And Lincoln's lab, for instance, is one of the labs, or other labs around the world who all have the ambition of deploying the end-to-end ORAN architecture. The third stakeholder, obviously, is are the users, the partners of these labs, right? So in our experience, we also, in the south of France, where Open Air Interface is based, there's a lab that deploys the end-to-end and outdoor network, et cetera, that I described earlier. There are industrial partners that are users of those labs. So there is interest and backing from not only industrial partners, but also European projects and forward-looking research that are users of those showcases. So there is, in terms of the business model, who will pay for all of this, there's some visibility. What else? Right. So as we said, we're walking through what it means to different people, the different steps, CI, etc. So basically, CI is the process where also called test-driven development, where new features are being added into the code base of these different open source communities, and there's an entire process for integration of that, so that the existing code remains kosher. And this is what we are calling CI in this CI/CD/CT terminology. And then the CD is in fact, when these networks actually deploy in the lab end-to-end, and it's in the hands of the lab users to basically deploy and run their test cases. And in that, we identified two different kinds of test cases. One is the conformance test, basically, making sure that everything that has been specified or that conforms, that ORAN specifications conform actually works. So that is one series of tests that the labs are expected to run. And then there is another series of tests which fits more in the CD/CT area, which is the use case driven tests, depending upon who are the partners in the labs and what are the interests of the labs. So this is sort of the terminology that we identified as a group during this discussion. Right, there was a question that was raised about how will new features be added into this end-to-end blueprint showcase, whatever you may want to call it. Obviously the process for that is depending upon the kind of feature that we are talking about. Different open source communities will include that feature in their code base. So those who are interested in that feature would need to engage with the open source communities for integration of those features in the code base, which later will deploy down the line, downstream into the labs. There was a question that was brought up about the transparency of features and roadmaps of these open source communities, and yes, that is a big question. Well, I don't know big, but it is a question, and the processes and the engagement with those who are interested in this kind of setup is needed to streamline this process and make it more, improve the quality of this, so that there is traceability and transparency in what each release of the different open source communities contains as feature set. So definitely an important question. Of course, the other question that was also asked here by the other groups is who's paying for it, basically, who's the blueprint manager, right? So we believe that, this is creating value to many different stakeholders. I spoke about the, in our ecosystem, stakeholders like, funding projects, European projects that are relying, European or US projects that are relying on these platforms to start at the baseline level, and then, adding more features, more advanced features as the research feeds into standards and standard moves forward. So there are those stakeholders, and obviously we hope, and that's for you to tell us also, is how is this creating value for different kinds of players in this Open RAN, ORAN industry. So that's where we stop.
Great, thank you. So we have about 6 minutes for any final questions, comments, thoughts. I will throw it open. I have one of my own that I would throw out, but go ahead and we'll get from the group here. There's a microphone over here up front.
Hello. So my question is on the prioritizing the features. Okay.
Good enough.
So my question is on prioritizing the features. So as Sridhar mentioned that there are 3GPP features and ORAN features. So my question is on like, are ORAN, like in ORAN Alliance or the ORAN vendors considering 3GPP features as a baseline and developing on the RAN side? And I know there might be more features on the ORAN piece as well, but are those considered as a baseline in their implementation, or they are not considered those? Or if they are not considered, then how it can be simplified for the field deployment or commercial deployment of those features to consider ORAN Alliance or ORAN side features only instead of 3GPP features? That's my question.
Okay, I'll make a quick answer as far as at its MVP. The way we've approached it is first as a feature function elements. So whether they're 3GPP or RAN Alliance, it didn't really matter. What we're talking about is how do we want this network to function? What feature sets do we want it to support? And so I think in that regard, even if you look at the ORAN Alliance specifications, they always refer back to 3GPP underlying specifications. So the question really is the question of how to test. And the first thing in the process, you really sort of have to define your feature set. And that will include the 3GPP fundamentally, but it will also include some or many of the ORAN Alliance. So what I would say is that you could probably come with an interesting baseline, but as you look to validation of a given deployment model, it's going to vary. And but the first step in that process is defining the feature function content that will rotate down into the given specifications, whether they're 3GPP or ORAN Alliance. So there's not a uniform way to do that, I don't think.
Okay. So can we consider as the like a basic features like throughput or latency related based on those, and some of the performance features based on like priority preemption? Can we consider those are considered in the ORAN or in the ORAN Alliance or on the ORAN side as a baseline from those? I know there might be a lot of other features as a baseline to be tested.
Yes, that's I think the best way to approach it. But you things like supportive mobility features and stuff that are by definition 3GPP, as well as various ORAN Alliance features. But yeah, we're still looking to develop, and I think the industry in general is still looking to develop that baseline. Okay. But yeah, that's the approach you would have to take, I think.
Okay. I kind of think of it as ORAN Alliance features are on top of 3GPP features. That's the baseline to start with. Okay. Should go to the next question. Thank you.
Okay, so I have one question regarding lifecycle management and CI/CD/CT. We've observed lots of vendors coming up with their own automation CI/CD platforms for lifecycle management, and these are the Open RAN vendors themselves. At the same time, TNM vendors via Keysight have similar or variations of their own CI/CD/CT platforms for lifecycle management. Wouldn't it be better or useful for ORAN Alliance to adopt something that is standardized, for example, the ETSI NFV lifecycle management framework, Otherwise, we're going to have several CI/CD/CT platforms from different vendors, and then we will struggle to harmonize. So that was my first comment. The second one is all of these CI/CD/CT platforms, at the end of the day, require northbound APIs to some sort of OSS, BSS systems that manage the underlying infrastructure. And I don't think we are discussing those northbound APIs at all. So yeah, 2 quick comments.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's sorry.
Yeah, invite comments. I mean, for me, I'm not an expert.
Yeah, from my perspective, if anybody else has any specific comments in this space, happy to help. But I think it's a good question, and I'll make sure to capture that in the notes. So I don't think there's much conversation about that at all. So I think it's something we do need to start thinking about. Looks like we have time for one more.
Maybe I just wanted to follow up because it was related to the prioritization discussion, and also maybe I can also talk a little bit about the NFV part. So I think the issue is, and at least in the discussion when it came up between 3GPP and ORAN in the previous session, we did not try to separate whether it's a test. See, when you're trying to deploy a network, there are certain tests you need to do. The test plans and specifications can come from multiple standard bodies. And I think that doesn't matter because for every operator's network, there are so many standards that you have to follow. And you just have to make sure that, I mean, the whole point is there should be no duplication and there should be no gaps. And I think that's what we want to kind of emphasize. And if somebody has already addressed it somewhere else, there's no point in duplicating. But I mean, all the tests have to be done, and it doesn't matter which standard body provides those tests. So we have to kind of support that.
Maybe 1.5 more.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly add, I don't really understand why you say that there are no northbound, not you, but the person who asked the question.
Charles.
So, he's looking. Well, in fact, we spoke about the different open source communities in this case. I mean, he spoke about standardization bodies, but, the open source communities like OSC, they have components, right? And the interfaces like the E2s and the O1s, etc., they are defined, and then they can be part of these deployments, right? The showcases or the blueprints. So that components.
Sorry, I think that the question was more not on like the internal interfaces like E2 or O1 or anything like that. It was more on if I'm an operator and I'm managing a large scale deployment, I'm going to have inputs to that deployment that are going to be triggered, right? Like, so like there's going to be gating and releasing and sign off by like the operations team before stuff rolls into the network. And we haven't talked about like any of that architectural component. And, and I haven't even thought about that in our lab because all of our approach to CI/CD/CT is not from I'm managing an operator deployment. I'm managing lab testing for the purpose of testing all the various components. So I think it's a great question. It just hasn't been something we've focused on yet.
Yeah, it's a missing element, and I'll make sure to capture that in the notes. All right, Jeremy, I think we are done. Thanks everyone for participating and good discussions, good comments, and being active.
All right, let's thank Lorson and David. Let's get right